Hi, and welcome to Lockdown Learning with Guardians of the Deep. I'm Sally, and today we're going to learn about the very cool floating blue community. So these questions cover the content that I'm going to be chatting about during this presentation. By the end of it, you should be able to answer them all. And if you'd like, you can pause the video now and make a note of these questions so you can answer them as we move through the slides. It might make it a little bit easier. The floating blue community is a collection of plutonic organisms living in the open ocean. We encounter them when they're washed out together during strong onshore winds. In Komaki, that tends to happen mostly during winter when the westerlies blow. So Pluston are organisms that live at the very top surface layer where the air meets the water of an aquatic environment. In this case, it's the sea. These organisms fall within three different phyla. The blue bottles, blue buttons, and the by-the-wind sailors are from phylum Cnidaria, defined by the cnidocysts, the stinging cells. Boy barnacles and Columbus's crabs are arthropods, while the violet storm snails and sea swallows are mollusks. This community includes filter feeders, stinging hunters, and their predators, and I'll talk about these species, covering any cool features they may have, starting with the blue bottles. As mentioned, the presence of cnidocysts or nematocysts put the blue bottle in phylum Cnidaria. This organism is not just one animal, but rather a collection of highly specialized polyp colonies. The nematophore or float is a single individual that supports the rest of the colony. It's a gas-filled gland that's filled with nitrogen and carbon monoxide. It can be deflated to allow the blue bottle to sink beneath the waves. The dactylozooids comprise the single massive tentacle used in defense and to detect, capture, and transfer prey to the gastrozooids, responsible for digestion. The gonozooids are solely reproductive polyps. Blue bottles are able to capture larval fish, small crustaceans, and little mollusks. From this floating community, their predators include violet storm snails and sea swallows. They're also eaten by loggerhead turtles, and once they wash up, are scavenged on by plow snails. The stinging tentacle used to trap prey grows up to approximately 10 meters long, but can be contracted to 300 millimeters, about the length of a ruler, or actually the exact length of a ruler. What's quite interesting about their float is the angle at which it's held. It can either be orientated to the left or the right, and this determines whether they'll be blown to port or starboard, left or right. So on our west coast here in South Africa, the majority are orientated to the right, so that during the prevailing winds of summer, that being the southeaster, they'll be blown offshore to the safety of the open ocean and away from the threat of stranding. Similar to blue bottles are the blue buttons, also a float and hydroid colony from Cnidaria. Their float, however, is a flat disc-like structure, and it's surrounded by a short skirt of tentacles. The mouth of this organism also has the function of waste release. They feed on zooplankton and are preyed on by violet storm snails and sea swallows. Juvenile Malabar kingfish shelter underneath the floats of the blue button, showing preference to a specific individual. Even when they're forcibly separated, they will always go back to a specific individual. Another Cnidarian float and hydroid colony, but this one with a kinked sail, is the by-the-wind sailor. Like the blue button, these organisms also prey on zooplankton, with their predators being violet storm snails and sea swallows. These sailors have a mutualistic relationship with zooxanthellae. The dinoflagellates are protected within the cells of the by-the-wind sailor while providing additional energy through photosynthesis. As with the blue bottle, the orientation of the sail determines in which direction it will be blown. From the phylum Arthropoda, boy barnacles are highly modified crustaceans, living headfirst in their shell and feeding with their legs. They are the only type of barnacle to produce a gas-filled float. This float is secreted from modified cement glands in the base of the stalk, and take on an expanded polystyrene texture. Two very different forms of barnacles exist. The sessile acorn barnacles, like the volcano and toothed barnacles, which have the characteristic conical shell and are found attached to rocks and other flat, hard substrates, a common intertidal site. The stalk barnacles, like the goose and boy barnacles, live on floating objects, other animals, or in the case of the Dosima species, secretes its own float. Both barnacle forms are protected by a series of shell plates and have long, hairy, modified legs that are extended through an opening between the plates to filter food from the water. Boy barnacles comb the water for plankton and detritus and are preyed upon by seabirds. During the spring of 2011, the shores of the Western Cape witnessed a mass stranding of boy barnacles. Washed out in the presence of other floating community organisms, our beaches were covered with incredible numbers from Paternoster on the west coast to De Hoop on the south. It is thought that unusually persistent westerly winds carried this community from the South Atlantic Gaia to our shores, and all of these photographs are actually from that event. Even though these barnacles secrete their own float, small individuals do attach to floating marine debris, and with the increase of human-produced debris in the sea, there has been a rise in the number of stalk barnacles on the open ocean. Also known as the bubble raft shell, these violet snails belong to phylum Mollusca, a group of animals that includes gastropods, like sea slugs, bivalves, such as mussels, and cephalopods, octopuses and squid. They feed on bluebottles and by-the-wind sailors, and their predators include fish, seabirds, other mollusks, and turtles. A bubble raft is created when the snail traps air bubbles within a layer of chitin secreted by its float. This allows the storm snail to float at the sea surface, and as it hangs upside down, it requires reverse countershading to camouflage it. So countershading is a form of camouflage often seen in marine species. Think great white shark or African penguin. Their dorsal surface, that's their back, is dark, making it difficult to see them if you're looking down at them from above. Their ventral surface, their underside, is white or light, blending them into the sunlit surface waters when you are looking up from below. This allows penguins to hide from their predators and sharks to ambush their prey. In the case of the storm snail, hanging upside down at the sea surface, it needs the ventral surface to be dark and its dorsal surface to be light. In the photo on the top right, you can see small pink cases. These are the egg capsules of the snail. Another very cool predator in this great blue fleet is the sea swallow. Also from phylum Mollusca, this nudibranch falls within the gastropod group of sea slugs. It feeds on the cnidarians of this blue community, the blue bottles, blue buttons, and the by-the-wind sailors. Seabirds and turtles feast on this little blue dragon. As with the storm snail, this nudibranch uses reverse countershading to blend in at the sea's surface as it floats upside down to feed. The photo on the top right shows the dark patterned ventral surface, while the photo below shows the clear dorsal surface. Note the air bubbles in that bottom photo. The sea swallow gulps these at the sea surface in order to stay buoyant. Another fascinating feature of this little creature is its ability to store the nematocysts, the stinging cells of its cnidarian prey, and use them in its own defenses. The last of the blue predators that we'll be looking at is the Columbus's crab. Like the boy barnacle, this crustacean belongs to phylum Arthropoda, and like the sea swallows, it hunts bluebottles, blue buttons, and by-the-wind sailors, seabirds being their most common predator. This little blue crab is often found in association with loggerhead turtles and fills a mutually beneficial cleaning role. While the crab cleans the turtle's carapace and plastron of small epibionts, it receives a safe place to live. At night, the crab feeds on its cnidarian prey. Columbus's crabs are quite good swimmers, but only over short distances and in warmer waters, so hitching a ride on a turtle definitely has its advantages. So now, how many of these questions can you answer? This quiz, along with a number of others covering various ocean subjects, can be found on the Lockdown Learning page of my website, scientistinlimbo.com. I've also written an article about this floating blue community, Flotsam and Jetsam. It can be found on the articles page of my website. You can also learn more about the secret life of the by-the-wind sailor by checking out the video from Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I've put these links under Lesson 5 on the Lockdown Learning page so that you're able to follow them. There is also a collection of marine science and ocean conservation activities, crafts, and learning resources on that page. If you'd like to participate in and contribute to citizen science projects, have a look at Zooniverse for a wide variety of current studies. This week's activities include writing and drawing about the adventures of the Great Blue Fleet as they ride the ocean currents of the high seas. Next week, we'll be learning about cetaceans. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next week.